Okay, so last week we looked at the three aims of Zen. So Joriki was the first one, Kensho was the next one, and then integration or personalization of the experience was the other one. So we discussed those aspects. So this week I want to touch on the three training principles. So how do we get there? What are the methods of it? And at the same time, I'd like to link that with link Zen to Buddhism as well in this particular lecture. Sometimes Zen is seen or can be seen as not belonging to the Buddhist group, if you like, or stream. And that is because Zen, in many ways, as I explained before, can be, can be practiced in a non-Buddhist context. So there are many Christians, even in our group, that practice Zen, and some even call it Christian Zen. So it is quite often practiced in a non-Buddhist context, or even in a secular way. And as you may know by now, or get an inkling of it, the actual practices itself lend themselves to being practice in a secular way quite easily. But nevertheless, Zen comes from Buddhism. It's part of a Buddhist stream, and it links to Buddhism. And I just want to draw those parallels, and I want to draw those links out in today's lecture. So even though that there are many streams of Buddhisms, there are nevertheless some parts that link all of Buddhism. And one of those, of course, is the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble. Has anyone heard of the Noble Truth? Just raise your hand. Yeah, I can see some nodding there. Yeah. So the Four Noble Truths are basically essential, if you like. They touch every stream of Buddhism. The first noble. By the way, before I continue, noble truth. The word truth. Stephen Batchelor, who's a scholar, former Zen person, and now a Theravadan scholar. He translates truth as tasks. So there's a quite different take. A truth sometimes can be seen as like a metaphysical truth or a universal truth. So we don't necessarily should look at it that way. The Four Noble Truths are really tasks or challenges for us to realize ourselves. So they're not so much something that we believe in. We can believe in it, but it really doesn't. That's not going to bring us anywhere. So look at even though we refer to them, they're traditionally referred to as truth, but really the challenge is to look at them as tasks. And the first task or the first truth is there is suffering. And this is quite an interesting one. There are different levels of looking at all of those fours, including suffering, depending on our ability to see it, to view it, to see it, to experience it. So some people might see it at a more superficial or much deeper level or more experiential level than others. So we're all, if you like, at different levels. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way it is. And so some people experience these truth or tasks differently. But just basically, there is suffering. So it's quite often suffering, or dukkha as it's called in Sanskrit, is seen in a negative way. But this is a much broader context, suffering. So you can look at, I always like to start off with the positive aspects of suffering. Suffering in many ways is the driver of our conditions of evolution. Without suffering, we wouldn't have Zoom. Without suffering, we wouldn't have air conditioning. Without suffering, we wouldn't have many medicines that we have today. Suffering in many ways gives us the motivation to progress. And that's not just for human beings. That also relates to plant life and also in the animal kingdom. Suffering drives evolution. We develop, depending on how the climate changed, we develop different skins, we develop different furs. Our body adjusts to the conditions. It might take many years to do so, but suffering actually drives many aspects of our lives. So, but at the same time, suffering or dukkha in a Buddhist context is also seen as that underlying unsatisfaction that we have, that dissatisfaction, sorry, I should say, this dissatisfaction that we have in our life. And that can be very mild. Some people some people might not even recognize it or might deny it, because quite often we deny suffering. We do anything possible to avoid suffering, especially as human beings. So we quite often see people having very mild suffering, say in the West, compared to say in some other countries. When you look at what's happening in Myanmar right now, there would be some extreme suffering, or in some refugees camps in Syria, compared to the suffering that we experience here in Australia, for instance. So suffering has different, it takes on different meanings depending on where we live and depending on the conditions that we are under. Also, from an existential point of view, there is a suffering as well. What is, suffering as in, why am I here? What's the meaning of it? What's my purpose? If we don't if we don't find the purpose, or expectations maybe that aren't met, and if we all of a sudden hit an age group where we think, oh, all the goals that I had, I haven't really met them, and we get to, the so-called midlife crisis, we can have huge existential crisis. So suffering is a really big part of our condition. And I would argue that most people that come to meditation come because of a form of suffering. There is some, why are we here? I mean, ask yourself that question. What drives us to do, what drives us, or what brings us to meditation? Usually there's an underlying sense of suffering. So when we get to the cushion, to the meditation cushion, it doesn't take long for suffering to arise. So that's the second task, is to have an awareness, actually to see the arising of suffering. Usually we don't see it, we suffer and we complain about it, and we try and find remedies, but actually having an awareness, a real direct awareness of the suffering as it arises moment by moment, is really where meditation takes us. So just taking the example of the cushion, which it doesn't take long for us to sit down. We have a task of counting our breath or reciting mu. I'll get to mu a little bit later. Or so reciting a mantra or whatever object of meditation that you choose. And before you know it, we get cold, or it's too hot, or our legs start itching, or the phone starts ringing, we get disrupted, or there's a sense that we need to do or want to do something else besides that which we are doing. And so it usually, it only takes a few seconds, and for suffering to arise, it arises. Suffering arises. That's the second task, if you like, is to get in touch with seeing the suffering, recognizing that, and the clearer we see the suffering, the quicker in many ways it dissolves. By the way, what's the cause of suffering? Can anyone, from a Buddhist point of view, can anyone tell me what the cause of suffering is? Yes.
Isn't it craving?
Craving, yes. So it's a quite interesting, when we say craving is the cause of suffering, or desire is another word for it. Desire is the cause of suffering, and this is, this is an incredible realization. The Buddha taught this, of course, and this was his discovery, that the arising of suffering is because of desire. And you can see because of that this whole movement of the renunciants started. They started renouncing. They started renouncing their cravings. So this is where this whole monastic tradition came from. The renunciation of cravings. So when you look at this in a secular context, it's actually very simple. What happens is we sit on a meditation cushion, and suffering arises because we don't accept, what is occurring. We want it to be different. So if we are cold, we want to be warm. If the phone is ringing, we don't want it to ring, or we want to answer it while we're sitting. Or if we have pain in our legs, it's because we don't want this pain. So the suffering arises because we want reality to be different than it is. That's very powerful. We want reality to be different than it is. In other words, we are fighting. We are fighting a fight that we can't win. We will never win that fight. Reality doesn't care. Reality moves its own way. And here we are, we want reality to change. So that is a really, it sounds simple, but this is a really major, this is a continuous task that we have to align ourselves with that principle. In other words, when we realize that we are fighting reality and we can't win it, there's already the element there of the third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. In other words, it goes away. If I can accept reality the way it is, there is no suffering. Doesn't matter what it is. That includes death. It's like if I fight death, then there's suffering. If I accept death, there's no suffering. There's peace. So and our cushion practice, our meditation practice, is a practice of completely aligning with that. And in Buddhism, it's called to see it the way it is. Right view, to see things as they are, is another way of saying that. To see things as they are is a radical acceptance of reality. So suffering arises, or there's suffering arises, and being able to have that awareness of it. And as soon as we are aware of it and we link into that, we know that it doesn't last. Nothing lasts. Everything is transitory, and it ceases. So again, coming back to our meditation cushion practice, our sitting practice, sitting with what is the practice. Sitting the way it is, holding our seat with whatever is occurring. Another way of putting it. So coming back to that bucket analogy, we just sit. It arises, it comes somehow. It comes to us, and it might even be pleasant. It might be unpleasant. And we just don't argue with it. And in doing that period of meditation, we just simply keep on letting go. And the practice or the object of meditation is just a tool. It's just an anchor point of letting go. And letting go is the cessation. Letting go is the cessation. And of course, the cessation of suffering is nirvana. It's that part that is unconditioned. Everything that is arising is conditioned. It's relative. It comes back to that or the duck and the rabbit analogy. Everything that arises is relation to relativity. I am comparing it with something else. I want something to be different than it is. It is all related to that. The cessation of it, if I can just concentrate and there is complete cessation, that, if you like, that is nirvana. That is the part that is unconditioned. So the fourth one is there is a path to that cessation. There's a pathway that we can adopt, so that we a pathway so that we can see that cessation, or we can align ourselves more and more and more with those four noble truths, and live in the world, or have a mind state or state of mind which aligns itself with the cessation of suffering. And that pathway is called the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. Have you heard of the Noble Eightfold Path? Okay, most of you have. Okay, so that Noble Eightfold Path, and I like to share a screen. I'd like to share a screen now to go into that a little bit more detail. So we can look at the Noble Eightfold Path, as in a circular way rather than in a linear way, because quite often, we might align ourselves not in a linear way, but they might occur simultaneously. But also look at it as a tripod. We need all of them. If one of them is broken, then, or if one of them is, or if we don't balance it out, then the tripod is broken and the stool doesn't, the actual tripod doesn't stand anymore. Um, the the Noble Eightfold Path is basically right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right view, and right intention. In Zen practice, we don't actually go into the details of it. That's not the Zen way. Other Buddhist traditions go into great detail of explaining what that actually means and how we should approach it. What the way Zen operates is different. The Noble Eightfold Path has three, if you like, training principles. Okay, and this is really the way Zen looks at it. And the training principles are concentration, ethics, and wisdom, or wisdom, concentration, and ethics. Some people, they put it in a linear way. You need to have this in order to have this. Again, from a Zen perspective, there are three training principles that we concentrate on. And when we concentrate on those training principles, then the Noble Eightfold Path factors, or the Eightfold Path factors, will show up in our life. So automatically. Or by default, if you like. So in Zen practice is very much a practice of really concentrating or focusing on those three training principles. The first training principle is concentration. And we talked already a lot about concentration or meditation, but under concentration, usually there's three path factors: right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So first of all, I'd just like to briefly touch on that before we move on to the next one, which is ethics. So first of all, what does that mean, right effort? First of all, there's already an ethical tone there, right effort. Okay, there's already an ethical flavor there versus wrong effort. You could say skillful effort instead of unskillful effort, or wholesome effort. So these are Buddhist terms which are quite often used. So right effort in our concentration practice, in our meditation practice, means the effort to prevent an unrisen, unwholesome state of mind from arising. So the effort to prevent an unrisen, unwholesome state or mind state or state of mind from arising. So when we sit in meditation and we fall into a unwholesome mind pattern or unwholesome mind state, of course, the right effort here is to concentrate on counting. That is wholesome, because why is it wholesome? Because we are because of the entire path that we are taking. We have an intention. And we talked about that intention already in this first lecture and second lecture. So we are replacing any unwholesome states of minds with positive states of minds, if you like. So again, the effort to abandon, you could say, the effort to abandon the arisen unwholesome states, or the arisen, any unrisen, or any arisen unwholesome state, anything that is unwholesome, we abandon it. That is meant by right effort. Okay. So we might, and of course that this can be quite dramatic. An unwholesome state maybe we might have had an incident at work, and we might have had an incident with maybe a colleague, and we might wish that colleague not well, or we might start reflecting on that situation, and we might get into a very unwholesome state of mind doing that. So when that of course happens, we switch over, we recognize, we have the awareness that this is happening, and then we switch over and we change over to a wholesome state of mind, which is practicing our concentration. While we are doing it, what this does as well is we develop, if you like, undeveloped wholesome states. So if we are, for instance, in a rut in our thinking, say we're thinking very negatively about a certain aspect at work or family, meditation, by doing that, we are practicing to develop undeveloped wholesome states. So we are developing wholesome states of mind in our practice. Again, that refers to the effort. That is what we're doing. Thereby we strengthen and we cultivate existing wholesome states mind states. So this all falls under right effort. And these are classical interpretations, by the way. They relate to generally to Buddhism. Right concentration, of course, it's the gateway to wisdom. If we have right concentration, we have the ability to direct our concentration, again, to wholesome states of mind and to hold it there so that unwholesome states don't even arise. So that whole concentration is that ability to cultivate that and to be able to do that at will. Okay. And of course, we develop the capacity to do that. And the more capacity we build, the more we build Joriki. There's a certain power that comes with it, which of course is the first aim of our Zen practice. So that's just on concentration. Right mindfulness, right mindfulness. Again, in the Theravadan tradition, there is a whole meditation on right mindfulness, concentrating on various aspects of our body. And certainly in the therapeutic tradition, right mindfulness is taken on from a therapeutic aspect in a big way, and it's very useful for therapeutic applications as well. Not so much in Zen. In Zen, mindfulness and concentration, as I explained before, is seen in conjunction with each other. So we can't have right concentration without right mindfulness. It's that idea again where we are that analogy with the car staying in the lane. We need mindfulness in order to recognize that we're wearing right or left. We need concentration to stick between the lines when we are driving, but mindfulness comes in when we're steering away from it. So that's what that means. Okay, now coming to ethics or sila or morality. There's various words that various words that are used for that. So how do we practice this? I'd just like to say something here to start off with, and I think this is very important. When we keep in mind that Buddhism came from a monastic tradition. Quite often we forget that. We demand answers from Buddhism, or generally everyone demand, or when I say everyone, a lot of people demand certain answers from Buddhism that were never really asked of Buddhism in the past, and simply because it is traditionally a monastic tradition. Okay, so one of the things that that monastics did before they came into a monastery, before they even started practicing, is they adhered to a code of conduct or some precepts, as we call them, and that was fundamental to the practice. I mean, that was a given. There's not even any argument about that. It's the first thing as a novice when you came into a monastery, you adhere to a certain set of rules and to a certain set of precepts. That, if you like, was the first base, the first foundation. Because in our secular society, we don't have this monastic code, that part is quite often forgotten. And it is forgotten quite often in Zen as well. And so it's very important to remember that that is part of that tripod, if you like, that ethical conduct is part of the process, of the training process as well. And if that part is missing, there is something that is fundamentally missing. And I'll give you an example. If you're sitting on the cushion, and if our life is ethically compromised, we will never find peace. Like, ethics and peace go hand in hand. There is just no way that I can find peace of mind if I have an unethical lifestyle, or if my practices or my conduct is unethical. So again, that is really a fundamental part. But how do we actually practice this? What do we actually do? I mean, it's easy said. Okay, we should have an ethical standard, and it's easy to put rules of conduct and saying, yes, I adhere to those rules of conduct on a website if we're an organization. But from a daily life practice point of view, what can we actually do in order to practice that? And what Zen and all other Buddhist traditions have, and mind you, some traditions have more or less precepts than others. The Theravadan has 5 precepts. The Zen happens to have 16 precepts. If you go into a monastic tradition, there's even more. I'm not exactly sure how many precepts are allocated to Tibetan Buddhists, especially in the secular way. So depending on which stream or which tradition you belong to, there may be some small differences. But the precepts are really important because they, if you like, give us a standard. Okay, I'll just unmute.
Sorry?
Okay, I'll just have to get, I can hear someone there. If you can unmute yourself, that'll be good. Okay, so here are the I'd just like to go over the Zen precepts. So the Zen precepts, if you like, they are designed to be guidelines. Okay. They are not designed to be commandments. They are designed guidelines for us to challenge ourselves and to see if we can live up to them. Okay. So the way they are practiced in Zen is very simple. We read them out on a daily basis before we have our sit, if you like. So what that does is quite a few things. As we read them out, we start not only familiarizing ourselves with them, but we start developing a sensitivity after a while to our conduct and how it aligns with the precepts. So that's if you like the practice. So just simply by reading them out and not even doing anything about it creates, if you like, an awareness level that forces us, or that somehow emerges when we are ethically compromised. So if you've been reading the precepts, say for 1 month on a daily basis, and all of a sudden you are challenged with an ethical decision, then that precept will pop up into your mind, and it forces us somehow to engage. And then it's up to us to make a choice. Which way are we going to go? So this is how it works. Okay. So it's not so much a matter of, okay, I've got to now live by these precepts. It's simply a matter of living our daily life and being aware when we break them or when we align with them. And it's a completely different way. It takes the pressure off, if you like. And what I'd like to say about that is it's actually a very exciting practice. So this is a practice, because this ethical practice, or living with the precepts, if you like, is it's a skill, and it's a challenge, and it's something that we engage with almost on a moment by moment basis. I go out of the door of my house and I go into my car and I'm in the traffic and the precepts comes up. Will I let someone in or not in? To what degree am I speeding or not speeding? So it doesn't matter if I go into a shopping center, to what degree am I obeying my COVID rules? The way it does, what am I buying here? Is this an ethical thing or not an ethical? So if those precepts come up in every situation in my life, and that is quite exciting, actually, and that's the way to look at them. So I'd just like to go over them one by one and make a little commentary on each of those. First of all, the 3 refuges. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. For non-Buddhists, you might think, "Ooh, I don't want to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha." But you got to understand from a Zen perspective, what does that mean? Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Classically, Buddha is the Buddha, meaning the awakened one. Dharma, classically, is the teachings of the Buddha, or are the teachings of the Buddha. And Sangha is the community of practitioners, or classically, the monks and nuns in a monastic setting, or in classical Buddhism, the Sangha are the mendicants the followers of Buddha or the disciples of Buddha, if you like. But in a secular way, Buddha is awakening. Taking refuge in awakening. That's the way to. So Buddha is not the Buddha. We don't take refuge in someone that lived 2,500 years ago. We don't remember this. I don't know if I talked about this in this particular lecture. Buddha should not be seen as Buddha is a symbol, if you like. Yes, it is a symbol, but in Zen we look at this. We're looking beyond the symbol. You know, if you may remember that graph that I had when we looked at non-self. Non-self can be seen through a symbol. In other words, we have an experience of non-duality, and that can be then translated symbolically, maybe into a figure of Buddha, or if you're a Christian, into God or into Jesus. But these are symbols. But we do not take refuge in the symbol. We take refuge in what that symbol actually. What does that mean? We got to find out what Buddha is. What is beyond the symbol of Buddha? Buddha behind me is that's just a statue. What is Buddha? That is our quest to find out. What is awakening? So we take refuge in that. It gives us purpose. It gives us a challenge. That's what this is the way to look at it. You can look at it as well. We take refuge in the Dharma. Dharma can be seen two ways: the teachings, or even phenomena in Buddhism. In Zen, Dharma, capital D, actually means the way it is. In other words, the Dharma is that right view. If I see very, very clearly the way it is, without the overlays of my conditioning or the overlays of my concepts, because if I look at a table, and I look at what really is a table beyond the overlay of the label that I use table. Getting into that is the Dharma. Okay, getting beyond the actual overlays that we have in order to penetrate what the way it actually is. To see that very clearly. And there are many different different dogmas on this, and different like dependent origination is basically looking at Dharma. For those of you that know some Buddhism, but I won't go. That's too much to touch on tonight. So that's one way of looking at Dharma. Sangha is. I like Sangha meaning. I like the meaning of Sangha being relationship. So this is Sangha to me is really where the rubber hits the road, as in my relationship with not just my loved ones, but my relationship with my colleagues, my relationship with other human beings, my relationship with nature, my relationship with my car, my relationship with my surroundings. Again, as I walk out the door, there is a relationship happening with wherever I'm going, with whatever I'm seeing. That to me is Sangha. So taking that is the way I look at that. That's the way you can look at those three things. Everyone has different ways of looking at it, and that's quite fine. So then the next one is the three pure precepts. So this is the three pure precepts are to do not evil, which is a negative formulation, to do good, which is a positive formulation. And then why are we doing it? To save all beings. This comes from the Dhammapada. And in the Theravadan traditions, to save all beings is actually to purify the mind. And there is actually a relationship between to save all beings and purifying the mind. I won't talk too much about that right now. But to save all beings is like the purpose. To save all beings is the purpose. So to do not evil, to do good, to save all beings. And now we come to the 10 prohibitory precepts. And again, they're formulated in two ways. A follower of the way does not kill, negative, to do not evil, but rather cultivates and encourages life, to do good. A follower of the way does not take what is not given, in other words, stealing, but rather cultivates and encourages generosity. A follower of the way does not misuse sexuality, but rather cultivates and encourages open and honest relationships. A follower of the way does not lie, but rather cultivates and encourages truthful communication. A follower of the way does not intoxicate self or others, but rather cultivates and encourages clarity. A follower of the way does not slander others, but rather cultivates and encourages respectful speech. A follower of the way neither extols self nor demeans others, but rather cultivates awareness of the interdependent nature of self. A follower of the way does not attach to anything, even the teachings, but rather cultivates mutual support and shares the Dharma with all beings. A follower of the way does not harbor ill will, but rather cultivates and encourages loving kindness, understanding, and forgiveness. A follower of the way does not turn away from the three refuges, but rather cultivates and encourages taking refuge in them. So here, these are the 10 precepts for lay people in the Zen tradition. As I said, the Theravadan tradition, the first 5 are usually the ones that the Theravadan is used by the Theravadan tradition here. I'd just like to say one other thing about them. So again, by the way, just looking at number 5 here, because I get this question all the time, does that mean I can't have a drink? You know, follower of the way doesn't intoxicate self. Does that mean I can't have a drink? No, it doesn't mean that. It means a follower of the way doesn't intoxicate self. In other words, you know, if you're so intoxicated that you don't know what you're doing, then you'll automatically are likely to break precepts. So of course, from a Zen, from a lay perspective, I should say, some people take it very. I've talked to some people that say no, it means no, absolutely no drink. Others are more flexible. So it's a matter of we need to deal with this from our own. Where are we at? To what degree can I deal with that and work with that? So this is the way to look at this. So some people have a drink or two, and that's fine. And some people don't, and that's fine as well. I'd just like to say another thing about this. Zen looks at these precepts in 3 ways. First of all, it looks at it from a literal point of view. So a literal point of view would be a follower of the way does not lie, but rather cultivates and encourages truthful communication. Now, not lying is very difficult, extremely difficult. A follower of the way does not lie. Okay, so from a literal perspective, there are no ifs or buts. There is no lie being told. Okay, that's the literal perspective. The other way that Zen looks at this is from a compassionate point of view. So from a compassionate point of view, it might mean that we might break the precepts for compassionate reasons. For instance, I remember traveling in Indonesia with an agent of ours, and at the time selling pharmaceutical machinery, and his brother was a doctor, and over there medicine is not readily available to everyone. So the doctor tells lies to patients. Will it hurt? No, it won't hurt much. Or this medicine will make you better, even though it is a placebo. So there's an element where you could argue: is that now is that a lie that is acceptable within compassionate grounds or not? So again, ethics is not easy. Ethics is the application of morality. That's the way to look at it. So here are some guidelines. How do we apply them? That is ethics. How do we actually apply them? You know, and we all have to come to that decision ourselves. And the more we engage with them, the more we see clearly, and the more we are appropriate. My mother was a Christian, and she believed in heaven and hell, and a very fundamentalist Christian. And I remember when she was on her deathbed, she asked me, "Do you believe I'll go to heaven?" You know, of course I said yes, even though I don't believe in heaven. You know, so these are things where sometimes a lie can be seen from that perspective as well. The other thing too, importantly, is intention. In Buddhism, intention is far more important than the act. For instance, if my intention is not to kill, but I kill in the process, It's that you know that is far less, if you like, you know, that is seen in a much lighter way than if you kill with the intention of killing. And of course, our legal system is the same way. If our intention is not to kill, then usually there's a manslaughter charge. It's not as severe as if the intention is to kill or if intent is proven to kill. So these are just some examples. The other way of looking at it from an absolute point of view, from an absolute point of view, when we're looking at lying again, is there actually such a thing as a lie? Can we actually lie? I mean, from that, once we take relativity out of the way, is there actually a possibility to lie? You know, that is a much deeper way of looking at it. And once we get working on koans, all these, by the way, all these precepts become a koan in themselves, and so that is being looked at very, very carefully once that whole process of wisdom practice starts, which is also koan practice as well. So these are the three ways of looking at the precepts. But my message here is that if you follow Zen and if you follow the Buddhist path, then first of all, dealing with your application of your values, you could see them as a set of values. How do we apply those values concretely in our daily life becomes part of the process. And it is actually it's very exciting. It makes life really in a way, it makes it meaningful, you know. And I personally get challenged all the time, especially with the lying one. I mean, why do I exaggerate sometimes? You know, that when I exaggerate sometimes, what does that say? You know, what does that say about me? Why do I need to do that? You know, it's like and there's growth coming from that. If I can admit to that I'm exaggerating sometimes, and then looking at that, there's a way of somehow that, you know, there's honesty, but there's also a way of going beyond that. And there's great growth there, and that is quite exciting from a development point of view. So I encourage you all to have a look at that. For those that want to start reading the precepts on a daily basis, they are published as they are there on our website. There's a link to them under, I think it is, I think it's under Code of Conduct, and right at the bottom there are the precepts, so you can print them out if you wish. But they're readily available on the internet as well. So these are the precepts. The other thing too, from a simply from a what's the word I'm looking for? From not just an ethical point of view, you know, the way that I link the precepts with my life is really the way I can say I live an authentic life. You know, if my speech, for instance, is different than my action, or even my thoughts are different than my speech, then there's a misalignment that takes place. And believe me, that misalignment shows itself on the cushion. There is a restlessness, there is we might not necessarily see that clearly now, but the longer you sit, the more clearly you see that. So if we can align our speech, our thoughts, and our actions, you know, ethically with the precepts, that has a huge impact on our peace of mind and our sitting. And as I said before, we all come to our practice because we are suffering to some degree, but a lot of that suffering is self-inflicted because we don't necessarily align those things. Okay, so I'll just stop that right now before we go to the next one, and I'll take some questions on that. Okay, anyone has any questions? No questions? I know, Daniel, you had some questions about ethics in a previous discussion. I don't know if that answered some of those questions, but yep.
Yeah, it did. It was again simply to get the
the Zen perspective of Buddhist ethics, I suppose, and understanding that at a deep level, the way that that is formed, but also I suppose to see that in some way it's a non-dogmatic perspective of what ethics means, right? Again, if you, most of those things translated into everyday language, right? There's no real religiosity or anything else there, which is also very interesting and good to see.
Yep.
That's really some of my interest, was to understand where that would lie, I suppose, how much dogmatism may be involved in some of that, or metaphysical beliefs would be involved in that, and really there's none, which is interesting.
Yep. Yeah, and I should say that, and as I said before, some, there's different teachers have different emphasis in Zen as well. Like in some Zen schools, ethics is hardly mentioned, except maybe at the end. And so there are different, there's different approaches. Different teachers put like anything, like in any other area, different teachers have different emphasis as well on that. But it's very important, and certainly in our lineage, certainly myself as a teacher, I take it very, very seriously, and always make a point of right from the start encouraging everyone to engage with it as well.
Because as you described earlier, it links. There's such a deep integration with living a good life. Like the practice itself of meditation is like the foundation, but it's not the ceiling, right? You need the rest of it to be able to know what the application is to the real world, because you can't sit on a cushion forever.
That's right.
They can only do so much there before you then have to live a good life after that. So the integration of those two things is interesting.
Yes, and actually, I'll show you another slide in a minute. There's some interesting comments on it by others as well. I didn't share before. I should have shared before. Okay, any other comments?
Arno, is with the precepts, when you meditate and when you start to connect more with your inner true self, so to speak, does some of those precepts kind of automatically start to align? Like, because I find when I meditate now that I've been meditating for a little while, sometimes when I'm faced with a situation, there is a certain feeling inside which tells me whether it just intuitively tells me whether I feel okay about it or not, which before I started meditating, I didn't have. So when you start meditating, even if you don't know those precepts like you've shared with us now, does that slowly start to kind of align anyway? Because I don't know if I'm making sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, you do, and you're right. It does. It percolates through somehow in a way. It's not easy to explain or make sense of. But as you are meditating, you are getting in contact. You are letting go of conceptual overlays in many ways, and those overlays, they make life very tricky. And we can start getting into all sorts of justifications. But the more you let go, the more simply it because ultimately everything is extremely simple. We just make it very complicated. And the more we get in touch with that simplicity of it, and that is through letting go, the more you touch on that anyway. That's right.
Yeah, and I think.
Sorry. Yep.
Sorry. I was just quickly. I was just going to say, and I think. If like say two people were faced with the exact same situation, each of us would handle it differently based on how we feel about it, but neither is right or wrong. It's just adapted to each being, if that makes sense as well. I find that that's coming through as well, some of that flexibility. And you need to gauge each situation as it comes, because you don't know what you're going to do when you're faced with it.
Yes.
And someone else might handle it differently to you, and that's okay. Yeah.
Yep. Just on that, ultimately, the ethical issues arise because of the duality, because of right and wrong, and here and there, and because that the polarization, if you like, as long as we are trapped in this is right and this is wrong, we're going around in a circle. That is the circle of samsara. We keep on going around. There is no solution. to that,
Yeah.
because there's always another opinion. There's always, it doesn't matter which side of politics you're on, or whether you're a Holden man or a Ford man, or whether you, it doesn't matter which side of the dualism that you belong to. There is no, it just keeps going around and around and around. And the breakthrough, and this is the goal, the breakthrough is to see beyond that dualism. And that is actually there's an ethical element there. That unification, and when we really see that when we really see that unity, when we see the oneness of it all, then that takes on a completely different dimension again. The danger is that we start conceptualizing it, getting into metaphysics, and then start breaking it apart again into, as we do as human beings, into intellectual concepts and more dualism again. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'll keep going. What I want to talk, I'll just show you another 2 slides on ethics, and then I want to talk about wisdom practice after that. Just share another slide here. Okay. So these are just these are some quotes that I'd just like to share with you. I've got them here. Okay, I actually can't read it all on the screen. I usually have another quote here. Okay, I'll just try and be able to see it. Okay, what is good? What is bad? What is right? What is wrong? What ought I do? What ought I to do or not to do? What, when I have done it, will be for a long time for my sorrow or my happiness? Yeah, that applies to every moment of my life. What is good? What is bad? What is right? What is wrong? What ought I to do or not to do? What, when I have done it, will be for a long time for my sorrow or for my happiness? So this is from the Lakana Sutta. And then another one, which I like very much, this is from Damien Kieran. He's an ethicist, a Buddhist ethicist. In the face of the complexity of Buddhist metaphysics, it is easy to lose sight of the fact that Buddhism is a response to what is fundamentally an ethical problem, the perennial problem of the best kind of life for us to lead. So, and I totally agree with that. Ultimately, it comes down to ethics. Ultimately, the whole thing comes down to ethics. And this is what Daniel was referring to before as well. What's the good of having meditation? What's the good of having all of this? And again, this is also where Mahayana and the Theravadan tradition especially when you look back at the Indian history of Buddhism, that's where that split occurred. One was like to save all beings, meaning that is the reason why we do it, to save all beings. There's an ethical element there, versus to purify the mind as in just nirvana. In other words, to keep on being in that mind state of nirvana, if you like. It's like that non-self, and keep on cultivating that. But from a Zen perspective, that is actually considered a sickness. In other words, that is just a stage. The real stage is to come back into the dualism and integrate that experience that we've had, in our daily life. And the analogy that is used is a lotus in muddy water. A lotus is a symbol for enlightenment, and muddy water is the symbol for dualism, for the messiness of life, for samsara. So that's the lotus is in muddy water, is in the if you like, the awakened state in our day-to-day existence. Okay, so I'd just like to now go back to wisdom, right view and right intention. Okay, wisdom practice is, wisdom is quite often seen as something you get. Okay, but quite often, especially in Zen, it is seen also as a practice. Okay, it is in Zen, and Zen has developed a way of cultivating wisdom. wisdom. And that is where Zen is a little bit unique in as far as Buddhism is concerned. So first of all, in order to have wisdom, and if you look at the Eightfold Path factors, we need to have right view. And right view, of course, is to see things as they are. Now, that requires a Kensho experience, ultimately. I mean, we can get wisdom of, wisdom is we can get wisdom like if I put my hand in the fire and I burn myself, I have empirical evidence that is hot and I will not do it again. There's wisdom there. Of course, we can get wisdom like that. But from a Buddhist point of view or from a Zen perspective, right view goes much deeper than that. It's really seeing things as they are beyond the conceptual overlays, beyond the dualism that I normally inhabit in my way of looking at things. Beyond that dualistic perspective, that is wisdom. And also right intention comes into that as well. So first of all, Kensho, sudden transformation versus insight, gradual transformation. Okay, so insight sometimes is seen as psychological insight and very important, of course, but this is not quite what Kensho is. Kensho is it's a breakthrough, if you like, is where that wall of dualism is, and that is sort of when it becomes sudden. We might gradually work towards that, cultivating a field to get there, but when it happens, it's usually a big aha moment where you see it. That is sort of Kensho. After Kensho, in the Zen, from a Zen perspective, we start working on koans proper. But how do we actually get Kensho? Okay. So first of all, Juriki. So we got to start cultivating a meditation practice. And secondly, from a Zen perspective, if that is your goal, if you want to follow that, first of all, you got to say it, you got to mean it, you got to own it. A lot of people do meditation, but underlying this, that's not. I can't. There's this Kensho experience or awakening experience. It's put in the too hard basket. It's like this is something for old sages. Little me from Brisbane, how can I get that? And yet, in the olden days, when you look at the sutras, quite often it's recorded that 500 people were fully enlightened and came together as an assembly. I mean, today, people would say, who could you say today is fully enlightened? We don't deal with that concept anymore today. It's almost like we put it away as something that happened in the past, But from a Zen perspective, we start coming back to that and asking ourselves, why not me? Why can't I get that? And so Kensho has to become a goal. If eventually we let go of that goal, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it needs to become a goal and an intention that is what I want to do. And if that is the case, then there is a way of working towards that goal. And the way Zen, and by the way, not all Zen traditions, I should say that as well, work with koans, but in our lineage focuses or uses the method of koans in order to get to that point. And the way it does it is it uses a koan to start. So first of all, a student comes to a teacher and states the intention clearly that they want to get a Kensho, that they want to work towards attaining a Kensho experience. Then and of course, and through the koan practice, the teacher then assigns a koan to the student. And in our tradition, and in many traditions before us, that koan is the koan mu. And the koan is very simple. It goes like this: a monk asked Joshu. Joshu is the famous master, Zen master, Tang Dynasty, China. Does a dog have Buddha nature or not? It was very simple. A monk asked Joshu, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? And Joshu simply answers mu. Mu. Okay. So our mind, our intellectual mind, when we look at that koan, can't really do much about it, which is the purpose. It's not. This is not an intellectual inquiry. We quite often this is called introspection, koan introspection. So the task now is to find out what mu is. So the question is, does a dog have Buddha nature? Okay, that question in itself is interesting, but what's really interesting is the answer, which is mu. So what is mu? Okay, now I tell you right now, mu is the answer to all the questions. When you get mu, you really get all of Buddhism. You know, all of Buddhism, if you like, is an articulation of mu. There's just a million ways to ask the question and a million ways to answer it. But that is the nature of phenomena, the nature of logic, the nature of explanation, the nature of metaphysics. We can explain it a million ways but not get it. We can understand it a million ways and not get it. But here, the task is to get it. What is mu? Or you could ask, what is Buddha? Or you could ask, who am I? Or there are over 700 koans, each asking the same question in different ways. Okay. But you've got to start somewhere. And our lineage starts with, what is mu? So the process then works like this. You're given the koan. And the quest is to find out what mu is, and you need to be able to present mu to the teacher from then on. Okay. And you work with mu. And now, instead of counting as your object of meditation, you replace the counting with mu. So you simply, on your out breath or your in breath, or both in breath and out breath, breathe in. So that's what I refer to mooing. That is mooing. Okay, it's simply another object of meditation. Okay, and it's also called a key word in the Chan tradition, Hao Tao, a key word. Okay, so or some people call it a mantra. So even a mantra, moo. The nice thing about mu is actually the breath almost moves itself, as in the sound of the breath almost comes out as mu. But of course, we don't say it out loud. We say it in an interior. We say it silently. So what happens now on the cushion is that we melt into mu. That's what needs to happen. So same practice as counting, but we are now sitting and we're not engaging with anything else. Of course, we would still have suffering arises and thoughts arising and emotions arising, but the idea is to just move. So whatever is at the forefront when we meditate over our consciousness. So when we're meditating and I'm thinking about a cup of coffee, I'm putting energy on my cup of coffee. You know, and as mindfulness kicks in and says, no, I shouldn't really be thinking about coffee. I should be mooing, and I'm starting back at moo. Right intention and right effort. Right effort. It's a wholesome practice. So I keep on mooing over and over doing my practice. The idea is that I melt into mu. Now this is also interesting. Melting into mu, what does that mean? It means that I disappear. We need to disappear so that it's just mu. As long as there's an I left, as long as there is anything left at all, that is not mu, you know, we continue with that practice. And the degree to which I can disappear is the degree to which I can see mu. Mu shows itself to us when I disappear. So that's how it works. And when that happens, then, of course, you go to the teacher and it gets confirmed whether it is an authentic experience or not. That's how it works. And only when you've had that experience, and there's a process involved in that as well, but I'll talk a little bit about that later in the next lecture. But when that happens, only after that does koan work start proper. In other words, you don't engage in any other koan until you've had an experience of mu. And then any other koan, if you like, becomes a tool or becomes a method of looking at mu through a different context. So you might have, for instance, the koan, what is the sound of one hand? Okay, so that's a different context, you know, and so that needs to be shown. And so there are all these different koans presenting different contexts, and in a way they become barriers, as in we automatically approach koans dualistically, but they force us, if you like, to engage through that vision of that we had when we experienced Mu. And when that happens, that's the process of koan work. We are practicing through koan work right view. We are honing our skill to be able to access that on a weekly basis. And usually people that practice koans, they practice koans on a weekly basis. That's how it works. By the way, it can take years for someone to get to Mu. And some people may already have had an experience of Mu. They just don't realize it. You might recognize it now, maybe, if you've had an experience of Mu. Some people, we're all at different levels. Some people practice for 5, 6, 7 years, and then all of a sudden have an experience. That's just the way it goes. So there's different ways. Unfortunately, it's not a way. It's not a direct method where you do an exam, and then after you've done that exam, you can very clearly see whether you've got Mu or not. It doesn't work that way. It's something to work on. It's something that you need to engage with. Okay. So how do we practice with the koan? Mantra or keyword becomes the object of meditation, and also we practice as an off cushion introspective practice. So on the cushion, we just recite Mu. We don't engage with it. But off the cushion, after a while, Mu just comes up. And most people actually have an experience, when I say most people, quite a lot of people have an experience of Mu off the cushion, not necessarily on the cushion as well. So that's a little bit on koan practice and wisdom practice. So I'll just stop sharing that for a moment. I'd just like to just show you one more slide here. Okay. So those three aspects, those three practices, these are practices: concentration practice, ethical practice, and wisdom practice. What's the purpose? It is according to Koen Yamada, which is one of our founding teachers, it is a never-ending perfection of our character. That's what it comes down to. It's a never, again, you can see that ethical element here. It's a never-ending, that's how he defined it, a never-ending perfection of our character. So we are never-ending as in every moment is different. The way I am today, the way I was a year ago, is different. And the more I engage with Zen, or the more I engage with koans, the more I engage with ethics, the more I engage with concentration, it's never ending. The way I am today and maybe in 10 years time is different. It's never ending. It is a seamless practice that keeps on being ongoing. It's an embodiment of the Eightfold Path elements in our market life. So if we practice this sincerely, the Eightfold Path elements will automatically, or by default, as Shalina has mentioned, they will appear. If I practice this pathway, I cannot have but a right livelihood. Otherwise, it just conflicts. It just conflicts with my life. In other words, our integrity is honed. I like that definition of integrity as being the alignment of thought, speech, and the degree to which my thought, my speech, and my actions align is the degree to which I have integrity. And that is quite a challenge, but it is a magnificent challenge to have as a goal in life, to build on that. Okay. Then the other thing that's really important to remember here is that the goal is the path. So there is no end goal. Every day is it. That's really important. If the goal is the path right now, as I step out the door, or right now doing this Zoom lecture, or as soon as I go out the door and I engage with my wife, that is it. The goal is right there. The goal is the path at any given moment. That is the way it works in Zen. So it's not like a lot of people get trapped in this linear way of looking at it. Once I got this, and once I got this, and once I got this, and then this, and then this. That's the way we look at it. This is the way, of course, our time-space bound perception works. But if you can let go of that, the goal is the path. We're already there. We're already all there, but all at different levels, and we just keep on going that way. Okay, I just stopped sharing that, and I'll just ask if there's anyone else that has a question.
Yeah, can I answer a couple, please?
Yes, please.
So, can I just clarify? So, a koan is essentially a type of paradoxical statement that, upon contemplation, allows us to have some type of realization about the nature of reality.
You could say that.
Okay. And the specifics of is mu as in mu, like that's how you
Yes.
spell it?
Yes.
And is there a literal translation of what that is? Because
Yeah, there is, but actually, the literal translation is no.
right.
Does a dog have Buddha nature or not? No. But the important thing is not to get hung up on no, because
Right.
there's another koan which says, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? And he says yes. Okay, so don't get hung up on no. You know, but that's an intellectual way of looking at what is mu, you know, or what is sound, or what is table, or what is Daniel, what is Buddha. I mean, there's all the same question, but you've got to start somewhere, you know. So mu is just your starting point, if you like. Yep.
Okay. This is like such a different aspect compared to other traditions that I know of, that I'm still kind of getting my head around the way that it evokes a Kensho experience, I suppose, because it doesn't fit with like what I know of doing mindfulness or meditation or anything else. So
yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's why it's quite often in Zen it's called a top-down teaching. You know, it approaches it differently, and it approaches it from a non-dual perspective. It does not accept, you first need to break that barrier. As long as you're stuck in your dualism and your logic and your approach that way, then you're not breaking through to it. You know, so that is the gift that Zen brings to it, and it's different, and it goes straight to the heart of what this whole practice is all about, and that's the way Zen approaches it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, so may I suggest that we have a little sit, and then we wrap up after that.